Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about Sonic 4, or at least what it could have been if it was released in the 90s. Like my Sonic 06 video, this is like if we peek into another timeline. I usually see people talk about Sonic 4 if it was made in the 90s instead of the episodic iteration we have today, but there is a valid reason why we didn't get Sonic 4 back in the day. That's because of NICE, or more specifically, Sonic Team was fatigued with Sonic. They worked on 4 games nearly back to back with not so great working conditions, so I can see them being eager to work on something new and take a break from Sonic for the time being. However, what's more interesting is that with another team working at Sega that worked on Sonic games before, we could have had Sonic 4 back in the 90s. Yeah, we're going to talk about Sonic 16. The main point of this video is to discuss the what if. What if this tie-in game meant for the TV show at the time was refined and released to the public as Sonic the Hedgehog 4 in the 90s? Think of this as a retroactive wishlist video of mine where I discuss many ideas that could have fit in this game. Before we start, this video is not meant to disrespect the developers of Sonic 16, Sega Technical Institute, or STI, people who worked on Sonic 2 and Sonic Spinball. Because if you don't know, this game will eventually become the canceled game, Sonic Extreme, which has a lot of videos and documented history on the torture the developers went through when trying to get this game to work on the Sega Saturn. This video is if we travel back in time and help the developers with the game. Admittedly, a good portion of the ideas are mine, so keep that in mind. And it's just for fun. Okay, without further ado, let's begin. So, we start with Yuji Naka approving STI's Sonic 16 demo. Yuji Naka originally disapproved of Sonic 16 because he believed it was too slow. This was the most crucial decision for the game in my opinion because I think STI probably could have kept their game as a 2D side-scroller and not experiment with 3D in the later years of the development cycle, and that can only happen if Yuji Naka approved their first attempt. Now fast forward to where Sonic 3 was released in February of 1994. A good majority of developers probably will see that the beat 'em up stealth style gameplay wouldn't carry their game after Sonic 3 became the standard of 2D Sonic. It could convince STI that their Sonic game should take notes and heavy influence from Sonic 2 as they essentially reboot their game to be Sonic 4. This is a story that the lead game designer of the game, Michael Kosaka, came up with, alongside a few additional edits from me. One day, Sonic was out on patrol in the Great Forest while the Freedom Fighters, including Knuckles, were observing an old ancient handheld computer they discovered. After hacking into it, the Freedom Fighters were greeted by strange digitized people called the Myths, inhabitants of the digital realm, Micro-Mobius. The Myths explain briefly that Robotnik is conquering the realm and has kidnapped the princess Tiara Cyberusky. No, I'm not calling her by her other name. Let's be appropriate here. Before the heroes could comprehend what's happening, Robotnik hacks the computer and sucks the heroes into the realm and traps them. Moments later, Sonic returns to North Pole Village and sees everyone's gone before he gets sucked up by the computer as well. Later, Sonic is then awakened in King's Gambit Zone by a telepathic hologram of King Cyberusky, who tells him that Robotnik has trapped himself, Sonic's friends, and his daughter Tiara. The King tasks Sonic to free the Freedom Fighters, the princess, and himself, while also crushing Robotnik's attempts at taking over Micro-Mobius, with Sonic running off to save the day, beginning his adventure. After rescuing all his friends and beating Robotnik at the final zone, the normal ending is that Sonic and Co will celebrate Robotnik's defeat. If you had gathered all the 7 Chaos Emeralds, Tiara reveals that there is no such King Cyberusky and is actually Naugus in disguise. Naugus tricks Sonic into rescuing him so he can take over both Micro and Real Mobius. Before he started his attempt to take over Micro Mobius, Robotnik managed to ambush and imprison Naugus, who was exiled to the realm years ago and was in an ongoing war with Tiara and her subordinates. Naugus wipes almost everyone out in one powerful attack and prepares to destroy everyone, but Sonic transforms into Supersonic. Naugus flees the scene with Supersonic giving chase for the final fight. After Supersonic wins and saves the day, everybody celebrates the defeat of Naugus and Robotnik. Sonic lets Tiara and her people take care of the 2 evildoers, with Tiara thanking Sonic for saving her kingdom by giving him a kiss on the cheek, which Sally notices and gets jealous. Sonic notices Sally's mood and quickly says goodbye to Tiara as he and his friends ride Dosey to go home. On the ride home, Sonic and Sally have playful banter to just annoy each other, while the other Freedom Fighters just roll their eyes and laugh at the situation they are in. Ending the game. Excluding my edits to the story, the original draft of the storyline is Sonic Frontiers before Sonic Frontiers. With the story, I changed King Cyberusky to be a facade for Naugus because as development for the game continues on throughout the year, I believe the show will have a growing influence over the developers, and near the end of 1994, Naugus debuted in the second season of the show and was pretty much planned to be a major antagonist in the next season. Including Naugus in the story is something I see SCI doing just to jump on the hype train for a villain that rivals Robotnik, and since the wizard can't shapeshift, it's reasonable that he can change himself into a fake king to trick Sonic. Also, King Cyberwooski looks like Naugus a bit, and you can say that in this game, Micro Mobius will be recontextualized as a stand-in for the Void. Let's talk about the playable characters. Sonic is obviously pretty much how he was in Sonic 3 with instant shield and all. The only new move he will have is a new elemental shield, which is a spike shield, where he can shoot out spikes a la this move from Sonic 16 and protect him from spikes. Tails and Knuckles are pretty much the same as they were in Sonic 3. Now with the newcomers, Sally couldn't jump into enemies, curl into a ball, or do a spin dash, but she makes up for it with Nicole. She can zap enemies from afar with her handheld device a la Mega Man and do a double jump. Even though she can't spin dash, Bunny can do her version of the super pill, extend her arm in any direction to destroy robots, grab onto ledges, and can hover. I imagine that the mini ROM hacks we have in them now is what SCI would have done with them back in the day. With this game, we have newcomer to the franchise, Tiara Cyberwooski, co-created by Kasaka and Chris Sen for the sole purpose of being added to a long list of girls that people would ship Sonic with. Anyways, Tiara pretty much plays nearly exactly like Sonic, like doing the spin dash and curling into a ball, but she doesn't have the instant shield and can't beneficially use the elemental shields like Sonic. However, she can deflect projectiles with her electrical barrier. That's the 6 playable characters for Sonic 4, and you pretty much unlock every character from Tails to Tiara after each zone, a concept that will be utilized in Sonic Advance 2 and 3. Now let's talk about the stages. These stages are actually from the drafts of Sonic Mars and Extreme, and just me refining some of them. First off, stage progression is very different from the previous games as listed in the Sonic Mars manual. Instead of transitioning from the next act like the original trilogy, Sonic 4 has a world map like Super Mario Bros. 3. It consists of 3 acts, a boss act, and a save area which has Rotor who saves your game, and Antoine who allows you to switch out characters. Here are the actual stages that could have made it in the final game. First level is King's Gambit Zone. It's pretty much Green Hill Zone, but actually plays into the aesthetic of checkers and chess, as pieces from those board games will be hazards and obstacles like some of the pieces trying to crush Sonic. Quite meta actually. The second zone will be Log Jammer Zone, a jungle themed level based on a colony of beavers, and a revival of Wood Zone for Sonic 2. Next zone is from the draft of Sonic Extreme, which is Red Sands. It pretty much starts off as a desert level that transitions into an underground pyramid cave with lava and booby traps, along with some minecart sessions a la Donkey Kong Country, or actually Lost Labyrinth from the actual Sonic 4 we got. The next zone is Icebreaker Zone. It's your typical ice level that has the northern lights in the sky. Brace yourselves for this one, guys, because the next zone is Fat Tuesday Zone, which is a level based off Mardi Gras. That's a peak level. The evolution from gambling in Vegas to partying out in New Orleans, that's awesome. That is really cool. Obviously, this is going to be a fan favorite zone, with it being a huge parade town with balloons you can jump on as you run through the streets and rooftops. After that fun level, we had Cryptic Grotto Zone, which is an underwater level where you explore the deep sea in a sunken pirate ship. Next, we have Dreamway Zone, which is pretty much a sky cloud level mixed with it being a predecessor of Music Plant, believe it or not. Core Memory Zone will be the final zone in the game, and it's pretty much like Cyber Station for Superstars, but with more finality. Let's talk about the bonus stages. To get to the bonus stages in the game, it was planned that you need to collect 50 rings and reach a checkpoint to the access them. The bonus stage was supposed to be an air hockey match with Robotnik. That's awesome! Man, SCI were cooking with these ideas. Okay, anyways, before the minigame starts, you actually select your desired prize like elemental shields, rings, or 1-ups. Then your goal is to beat Robotnik and win your prize. You can keep going for more prizes by paying 10 rings. Aiming the puck to these tubes would be a good strategic way to confuse Robotnik, as the puck will come from a different direction, although Robotnik himself will get more challenging through each round. The only way to lose is if Robotnik beats you the first time around. To get to the special stage, it's just like Sonic 3, where you have to find special rings to access them. An early idea for the special stage was to find an emerald in a 3D stage, sort of like the Game Gear Sonic 1. However, SCI probably could have come to the conclusion of taking inspiration from 3D space shooters and would most likely use Oh, hey Dulcie. The special stage with Dulcie is just my ideal, but maybe the dev team would have come with that ideal anyways, because Sega was big on space shooters, and SCI probably wanted to use another character from the show in a unique way, while also trying to step up the visuals of the 3D special stages from Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. Also, my personal headcanon, Dulcie was made to rival Yoshi. I imagine Sega America being like, "Aw, Fat Plumber Boy rides a cute dinosaur, that's sweet, that's child's play, our boy rides a freaking dragon, get on our level." So Sonic 16 was planned to have speed levels alongside the beat 'em up gameplay before it was disproved. Now, in a game where it's a beat 'em up, and said game is based on a cartoon where Sonic's full speed is displayed through obtaining a ring, The speed-based levels could have been based around Sonic obtaining a power ring and going super fast, which could have been an auto runner. That idea probably stayed around even when the beat'em up aspects were dropped in favor of traditional Sonic game, as the Act 3 of the worlds will be auto runners just to display Sonic's true speed. However, that would mean that Sonic is exclusive to Act 3 and therefore you can't play as the other characters. Now, throughout 1994, development of the game could have been smooth. It's when we get to 1995 where I feel like development becomes a bit uncertain. You see, what could have happened in this timeline is that the game could be 55% done in development and was prepping up for a summer release for the Genesis. However, SCI will run into two problems. Sonic & Knuckles was released the previous season. This game, which is the follow-up to the aforementioned game, releasing the following summer will be too hasty and too quick. Also, the fact that it was planned to be released on the Genesis will be the point of oversaturation of the series. The Genesis was still popular and selling well in the West, but it was around this time that the industry was ready to move on to the next gen consoles. Sony's PlayStation and Sega's own new console, the Sega Saturn, were planning to release that year. If Sonic 4 was to be released in the holiday season of 1995, it would be overshadowed by the two consoles. There could have been plans to release the game on the 32X, but by early 1995, I feel like SCI would have known that the add-on was a failure and not worth putting time into it. So, SCI, and most likely prompted by Tom Kalinske, CEO of Sega America at the time, to put Sonic 4 as a holiday game for the Sega Saturn. Thus, we went from Sonic 4 to Sonic Saturn, or what fans probably would call in that timeline, Sonic Saturn. Because Saturn, I tried. Sonic 4 would still be its name, but the alternate name of the game will be Sonic Saturn. Think of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Sonic Saturn. I want to say this, Tom Kalinske was not a supporter of the Sega Saturn, but I feel like he would push this game to be on the system just to avoid oversaturation of 2D Sonic games on the Genesis and to push units from the Saturn in the West with an all-new Sonic game. It's worth mentioning that he wanted Knuckles Chaos to be ported to the Sega Saturn, but there wasn't enough time for that. As development shifted from the Genesis to the Saturn, SCI will come up with ways to showcase the power of the Saturn without changing the game, as in that would still be a 2D speed-based platformer. For starters, the game kept the same art direction it had on the Genesis, but is now a 32-bit sprite game after being ported over to the Saturn. I think a good game to make comparisons to in terms of graphics is Astal. Even though Sonic and the other playable characters are just a 32-bit upgrade to the 16-bit sprites on the Genesis, the bosses and the elemental shields are now pre-rendered sprites. Hirokazu Yasuhara, the level designer of Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, actually helped refine or improve level designs and layouts for Sonic Saturn. Fun fact, Yasuhara actually did work on Sonic Extreme, helping out with level concepts. The game was still a 2D side-scroller, but something was needed to show off the power of the 3D capabilities of the Saturn. So what was originally a 2D auto-scorer, the Power Ring levels are now 3D auto-runners. Act 3 has a fully 3D polygon Sonic running through 3D hallway interpretations of the zone he's currently in as he attempts to dodge enemies. The only other use of polygons in the game is Dulcie flying through the special stages, although the 3D portions of the game are outsourced to Traveler's Tales. Due to the power of the Sega Saturn, SCI can have animated cutscenes. Originally the game was going to have dialogue 16-bit cutscenes, sort of similar to other games like Streets of Rage 3. However, with the Saturn, STI and Sega America commissioned the studio behind the cartoon to animate key cutscenes in the game, like Sonic rescuing each individual friend or when the heroes enter a new zone. Some may say that having animated cutscenes wouldn't have been that big of a deal since CD did it first, but people forget that CD's cutscenes look like this on the original hardware, so going from that to something akin to the quality of the show in 2 short years would have been astounding in the 90s. Other than the respective voice actors from the show reprising the roles in the cutscenes and providing sound bites for the gameplay, that's all the graphical and audio enhancements the game received from going from the Genesis to the Saturn. STI would probably get Richard Joss to do the soundtrack of Sonic Saturn to give their Sonic game a distinct sound that is different from the Genesis games. Unlike the previous games that focus primarily on funk or rock-based tunes, Sonic 4's soundtrack is much more sympathized and focuses on more having atmospheric tracks, like the emphasis of having a slow piano opening to reflect descending to the bottom ocean floor in Crypto Grotto. These sounds of sleigh bells represent Christmas vibes in Icebreaker. And the use of jazz instruments and a slow melody in Act 1 of Fat Tuesday Zone to emulate the feeling of walking through a town with people during their downtime before the parade in Act 2 takes place. While not the first for a Sonic game, Joss composed a vocal song for the game that plays at the ending of the game, You're My Hero, with Debbie Morris at the vocals. Howard Drawson, the main composer of Sonic Spinball, came back and composed some songs for Sonic Saturn that had more funk or rock based tunes, like reusing the bonus stage theme from Sonic Spinball. The heavy rock tune used for the powering levels in the game, and the City in the Clouds, which serves as the file/select option music for the game. However, despite having two well-known composers and coming up with a memorable soundtrack, the most iconic song from the soundtrack of the game wouldn't be composed by them. The song I'm referring to is Space Queens, which plays during the Supersonic boss fight with Nagas. That song was originally a placeholder song composed by Chris Sen, but it was used in the final game because there was no time to properly compose a Naga's fight song. I picked Richard Jacques to do the music just so the Saturn soundtrack of 3D Blast would instead be made for Sonic 4, along with some tracks from Howard Drawson. 3D Blast on the Saturn still would have existed in this timeline, but it would just have a MIDI version of the Genesis soundtrack. Also, I kept Space Queens as the final boss song because that song does not deserve to be unused after all these years. The development of Sonic Saturn would be finished around September 1995 and was ready for the holiday season. Despite the heavy competition with the PlayStation, Sega knew they had an ace up their sleeve with Sonic 4. There could have been a huge marketing campaign for Sonic Saturn invested along with a Christmas special simply called A Sonic the Hedgehog Christmas, premiere in November to promote the game. Not to mention, one of the main marketable aspects of the game would have been the fact that you get to play as the Freedom Fighters, and the fact that Sega America would try to push "It's like playing the cartoon" just to show off that 2D games also have a graphical equality from the previous generation. On November 18, 1995, also dubbed Sonic Saturn Day, Sonic Saturn was released in North America and European territories, with it releasing in Japan a week later. The game was met with positive reviews and was praised for showing off the 3D capabilities of the Saturn, along with cutscenes and soundtrack being praised as well. But the overall game was criticized for being more of the same from the previous games despite the improvements. Now, on the subject of the Sega Saturn, I don't think Sonic Saturn or Sonic 4 will help push sales of the console. I don't think that 32S was the biggest issue that affected the Saturn because I believe Sega could have rebounded from that just like Nintendo did with the Virtual Boy. Mind you, that was supposed to replace the Game Boy versus the 32S being an optional add-on. But I do believe that it being shadow dropped during E3 1995 hurt its chances. Not to mention, the Sega Saturn was expensive, where we got this moment from Sony. $299. A 2D Sonic game the first year will be moderately successful alongside showing off the 3D levels in the advertising, but I don't think its success will be that high. While Sonic 4 will be a great follow-up to the Genesis games and a good start for Sonic in the 5th generation of consoles, it will just be a graphical upgrade while it will be unfairly compared to Super Mario 64, which was a revolutionary game, plus the fact that the latter was a fully 3D game. That's what the Saturn needed to have more momentum in 1996 and 1997 with a 3D Sonic game, and sadly, that never happened. But hey, there's many videos on why the Saturn failed and Sonic Extreme itself, so you can check those out. On the subject of Sonic 4 and how it do on its own merits, it would be the opposite. Due to this game being based on Sonic Sat AM, which even though it was cancelled by this point in 1995, to many people living during that time here in the West, the TV series is what people believe what Sonic was all about. It will be successful off of that. On the Saturn, it could sell around 1 to 2 million units, and Sega Soft most likely would have ported the game to PC in 1997 to have a much better resolution and make it more accessible to anyone who didn't have a Saturn. No different than what they did with Sonic CD and Sonic R. I think the game will have a healthy amount of re-releases as well. It will definitely be one of the major games on Sonic Gems collection alongside CD, R, and Fighters. It probably could have a remaster done by Christian Whitehead, which will be released for mobile devices, but I think that would be the last time it will be released as Sonic Origins was focused on the canonical timeline of the series. Little extra thing, Sonic Saturn will be canon in his own special timeline that follows his own version of the events of the games in Sat AM, Spinball included. A good visual of that would be how the reboot Archie timeline and how it misses the games for the show. At least one good thing is that the Freedom Fighters confidently will have a game that is their own instead of the cameos in Spinball. Actually, it would be quite interesting to think what the boss art of this game could have looked like. In the West, the late great Greg Martin was the main artist of Sonic boss arts, and those featured the Mohawk design for Sonic, which I still have a soft spot for. However, around 1994, he began to phase out that design and started to have something similar to the Japanese design. So, for a game that was made in the West, developed by mostly American developers, and based on a show for Western audiences, it would be somewhat intriguing that Sonic 4's US cover art would feature a design that is closer to the Japanese design of Sonic. Although it definitely most likely would have Sally and Bunny on the boss art to show that they are now playable. But what is even more interesting is that this game would be released in Japan as well. Therefore, we would have seen how they would be designed by Sonic Team for the Japanese boss art since Sally and Bunny originated from America. Going full circle when you think about it, huh? That was my video of Sonic 4. This was really fun to see what could have happened in an alternate timeline. In the future, I would love to see a fan game that recreates the ideas of what SCI wanted to do with Sonic 16 or Sonic Mars, because they were really cooking with their ideals. It was fun discussing what could have been. Thank you so much for watching, I will see you next time. Okay, enough time has passed.